Hi, this is Howard Cooper, and before we jump into this podcast interview, I just wanted to share that I've been lucky enough over the last couple of years to have interviewed a bunch of other leading therapists and agents of change, really exploring their take on everything rapid change related. What you're about to see was recorded a little while ago, but it still holds tremendous value if you're someone that wants to learn about how to help people make quick behavioural shifts. So I hope you enjoy, and to make sure you don't miss any of the new releases, then take action and click that subscribe button, and then you'll be kept in the loop when any new episodes come out. Welcome to the Rapid Change Matters podcast. My name is Howard Cooper, and for over 14 years now, I've been fascinated with helping people to create personal change quickly. But I still come across many who believe that lasting personal change has to take a long time, consisting of reliving traumas or deep psychological analysis, or simply that flawed notion that understanding why you have a problem will somehow make it go away. I'm on a mission to get people who work therapeutically with others to shift their thinking and realise that these beliefs are not written in stone. Rapid change can happen. So, to help you open up to what's possible, I'm interviewing top therapists and agents of change who are out there getting real results with real people really quickly. Before we get to the interview, I just wanted to let you know that I've written a quick-to-read, downloadable PDF on 5 strategies to amplify your client's response, with some great tips on getting your therapeutic suggestions to really sizzle. You can download this for free from rapidchange.works, where you can also find all the information about this episode and episodes still to come. Now, over to the interview. We are very fortunate today to be joined by Anthony Jacquin. Not only is he the author of the seminal book Reality is Plastic, The Art of Impromptu Hypnosis, but with over 5,000 sessions of brief therapy to draw upon, today promises to offer us many insights into the practicalities and challenges involved with facilitating change. He's the director of the UK Hypnotherapy Training College, and outside the therapy rooms is known by many as a pioneer in cutting-edge impromptu street hypnosis. Welcome, Anthony.
Thanks for that warm intro, and welcome, Howard.
Now listen, jumping straight into this, tell us a little bit about you, what you do, and how did you get started?
Okay, the initial inspiration, still a big inspiration for me, was my father, Freddie Jacquin. He always had an interest in self-development, that kind of stuff, read those kind of books, ran his own businesses. And back in 1995, I did a hypnotherapy course. It was very much hypnoanalysis kind of stuff at the time, a world away from what we do now. I was at university. He introduced me to what he knew, told me he felt like he was wearing an invisible cloak and that I should get one. And I'm lucky enough that between sort of hypnotherapy training and performance training and just the clients I see, that, I travel around the world teaching people how to do hypnosis and showing people how they can change their life, be happier, that kind of thing. So it's very satisfying. But my time is kind of split between doing therapy, teaching people how to do hypnosis, and performance as well.
So are there misconceptions that you come across that people have about the therapeutic process? And if so, do you have any thoughts around, re-educating them about what's possible? Or, what's your experience with this kind of stuff?
Yes, some people have an expectation that therapy will involve counselling of some descript or will involve a large kind of history take or offering. Some people are expecting perhaps you to perform some kind of analysis and understand and have that kind of expertise and offer direction. For some reason, despite contemporary hypnotherapists' sort of distaste with some of the ideas about regression and repression, amongst the public, they're very common ideas and that seem quite tied up with hypnosis. Mm-hmm. Again, less and less hypnotherapists do that kind of thing. Many still do, but even if people are kind of familiar, with some of the tools that you might use NLP or terms like brief therapy. I find there's at that point there's often a bit of a kind of void or a blurring, perhaps, of what that might entail. They'll often say, "Is it that kind of NLP stuff? I did a course on it at work once." And I guess they're kind of thinking about, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that I think they're thinking about clever language, and I don't know. There are many misconceptions. I try to just blast through them and tell people what I do.
Okay.
So
they come and see you, and what would you be saying to them about what you do?
Well, a good question came up at our hypnotism conference. I know you've interviewed Michael Perez, and he gave a lovely answer, which is kind of related to this. When people said, will it work for me? And he said, well, sometimes I seem to be able to help people when nothing else is helping them. And sometimes that change or that help is immediate. We get results very quickly. Sometimes there's a bit more work to do. We both need to kind of dig in and do a bit more. And sometimes we get nowhere at all. But we know that very quickly. We know, your expectation should be that you're going to benefit from the first session you have with me. If there's more work to do, then we'll know that. Mm-hmm. So in terms of just positioning the interaction, I kind of position it as being brief. And I might say, typically I see my clients for between 1 and 3 sessions. I've had over 5,000 clients for a wide variety of problems, from every kind of common habit and fear and anxiety, right through to real specific, things. Typically I see my clients between 1 and 3 sessions. And often, depending, let's take a smoking habit, very often that seems to be done and dealt with in a single session. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's more work to do. If someone comes for a longer term goal, perhaps weight control, getting the body they want, some physical goal or something, then we set out a course of action. But again, the actual contact time and therapy is pretty light compared to many other styles. So that's how I kind of put it to my clients.
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, that aligns very nicely with some of the stuff that I very much believe strongly about. I've come across a number of therapists, I know we've spoken before briefly about this, who, will say, oh, yes, you want to stop smoking, we have the, 15-session approach. And to me, I think it's difficult to know how long it's going to be before you see the person.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand it if someone's been trained in a particular approach, and there are some schools of hypnotherapy that do that. I hope it's not just for commercial purposes, but their approach is 4 sessions or 6 sessions. And in fact, when my father first trained, even more amusingly, whatever you saw the client for was a 12-session approach. And the 12th session was the last session. Mm-hmm. As if there was some secret being perhaps held for that 12th session. And the therapist would push the button, if you like, on the relationship in that 12th session. That's just not how I work. If someone has a protocol that they must follow, and again, there are people I respect in the industry that have protocols. Some of the kind of hypnobirth, natal hypnotherapy people I know have a set protocol that makes it easier for, say, a nurse, a midwife they've taught the protocol to deliver it without needing all the flexibility of years of hypnotherapy knowledge. So in that sense, just for the sake of thoroughness, I think it can have some value, but it's just not how I work. Not in a sense that I'm sort of in the blocks looking to race, and do this in 30 minutes rather than 60. But sometimes I only get the opportunity to see people once. It's just the way it is. And I know that for many people, one session can, if not get them all the way where they want to be, it can show that it can give them enough space to kind of observe that change has occurred, and that can then encourage them and kind of fortify them to dig in and do the extra bit of work. So, it really varies, I guess. But most of the work I do, the interaction's pretty short, and the client has the expectation that that's what it's going to take.
And presumably you have an expectation that you can help them and that they can respond rapidly.
That's my belief. I actually believe we're very, very close almost to being free of a problem, even when we're completely embroiled in it, even when it's been running consistently for 20 years, even if it's 80 cigarettes a day. None of these things have ever seemed more entrenched or more static or more complex than 5 cigarettes at the weekend, or I've had a phobia since a turbulent flight last week, or whatever. To me, it's exactly the same problem. I don't really give any credit to a problem's, status or longevity or anything like that.
Mhm. Which I think for many people, certainly if they have problems or are thinking about therapy, that's quite a different approach. Because I know a lot of people who will say, well, hang on a second. I mean, I see people who say to me, Howard, are you going to be able to help me? How can you possibly help me in a short space of time? I've had this problem for 50 years.
And you've been doing the same thing for 50 years. How long did it take you to learn this problem? Let's face it, most fears we're going to frame as it took less than a second. So if I get that kind of response, I say I understand that, but even though something can kind of be getting in the way of your life and shaping your decisions and seemingly the choices you have available to you at any given moment, the structure of that thing, the problem itself, has actually gone unexamined for 50 years, or if it's been examined, then it hasn't been operated on. And that's what we're going to do. So I just try to pull people back into a better metaphor, if you like.
Yeah.
Their beliefs, are they experts in therapy? Are they experts in psychology? Do they know that problems that have been experienced for 50 years are more difficult than problems that have been experienced for 5 years? They don't know, because it's not true. So I understand where they're coming from. But again, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but I just try to keep our eyes on the road, as it were. And when I feel, those kind of, you could call them objections or just questions, when I feel I'm kind of being pushed off track, I'll pull it back on track, and I'll have, any number of anecdotal case studies, even if some of them are a kind of composite of clients that I've seen, a kind of, very liberal, my friend John kind of technique. I still feel like I'm speaking the truth when I say, you don't need to live with that problem. Or when we've done this work, you'll no longer be able to feel that. Or when you walk out of the door this evening, you'll be a non-smoker. How bold do you want to be in setting this person's expectations? Perhaps there is something in the slightly more honest answer of, sometimes I can help people, it's miraculous, it's like that. It takes minutes. Sometimes it takes more time. Sometimes I can't help at all. That's why I like those words from Michael Perez, because I've always kind of erred toward, at least within that first session, toward, we're going to do this. Just like if we were setting off, for base camp 1 of Everest, and we got ourselves in shape and got the appropriate kit, and one of us was sort of fussing about, are we going to do it? We may not get our time or be the fastest up there. We're going to do this. Occasionally people fail to do it. Big deal. Does that make us dishonest? Not dishonest enough that I'm going to stop. At least I like to kind of think of it as pegs in the ground within the session. Very early on in the session, I look at the client and make a statement like that. When we've done this work, you're going to have a lifestyle that completely supports being a size 12. When we've done this work, you're going to be free of those feelings. That will be fantastic, will it not? I get a lot of this stuff from my dad, who is even more unconditional in these statements. It's going to be done. It's going to happen. Does everyone in the room leave a group quit smoking session and never smoke again? No. But does everyone in the room have the possibility of that happening? Yes, I believe they do. So I think that's important, and it keeps brief therapy on track. Because, again, not that we're up against a stopwatch, but depending on where you look, in CBT, there's plenty of good evidence for 20 sessions might seem brief. For some hypnotherapists, 12 sessions seems like an eternity, and a kind of some kind of manipulation of the therapeutic relationship, promoting a reliance on the therapy or the therapist. But again, we are kind of in the miracle business. It's still miraculous if someone's had a 50-year problem and 12 sessions shift it. If 12 minutes shift it, is it more miraculous Well, maybe it just looks more miraculous.
I quite agree, and despite the fact, and I keep almost reaffirming this to people on these podcasts, despite the fact that the podcast is about rapid change, for me, rapid change is doing it as quick as it can be done.
Yeah, sure.
You know, and I think there are issues that there needs to be some space and some time, maybe for them to go away and dig in and find other things for them to do. You know, and other people, it's going to be, you know, that you can do something in 10 minutes, which they didn't think was possible. You know, and for others,
Exactly.
it takes a little longer.
Yeah, I agree. But again, it's not a race, and again, there is some value in repetition. There is some value if we look at the evidence in terms of post-therapeutic support, ironing out some of those creases, going out reaffirming. I don't do a lot of that, to be honest, but there is some value within it. You know, there's no doubt about that. So yeah, it's not a race.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
But I'm wondering, are there challenges when people have experienced change that seems miraculous? They've had a problem for a long time. They have a transformation. Are there challenges about their response to that? You know, for example, they can be sitting in the chair freaking out, absolutely freaking out at the thought of flying, for example. You know, flaming, full-on, 100% panic attack. You know, we do 20 minutes of stuff, and then I get them to think about it again, and they're going, huh, yeah, I'm all right, I'm fine. But that's here. Would it really be like that? So I was wondering whether you've experienced that kind of thing and the challenges that I think that rapid change can lead to.
Yeah, I think there are some challenges. I don't know if they're exclusive to rapid change, because even if you've done 20 sessions, you've still got to get back into the real world and agree that you're done and that it's done, if you like. The first kind of 6-7 years of doing this, I'd say 70% of my clients came to quit smoking. Kind of a specialist in that. Maybe I've seen 3,500 people for that kind of thing. My dad's probably seen 20,000. And it was always very much a single session approach. You're going to leave here today as a non-smoker. That'll be a fantastic feeling, would it not? And if we needed to do more work or a second session, then they could come back. There was no fee for that and that kind of thing. So it's very much that message. And I'm certain that thousands and thousands of those people, I know because it was a referral business, that thousands and thousands of those people quit right there and then, walked out, need gone, finished. If it's absolutely easy, if it's actually like someone's flicked a switch, the need is gone. They're not necessarily an evangelist, non-smoker, you know, berating everyone for doing it. It's just not there. They're not bothered. There's a trap. It's so easy. The need is gone. I haven't had one for a week. I'm out. I'm having a drink. I'll have a cigarette. You could even wake up the next day and think, oh, you know, I had a cigarette. Shouldn't have done that. And it may be the next time you have a drink that the thought pops up. Do you know what? I had one when I was drinking, and I haven't had one since. I'm going to smoke when I'm drinking. So it can very easily build into a habit again, of course. Mm-hmm. But closely related to dealing with a phobia, for example, the best we can really do in the therapy room is this SUD scale, is how bad is it when you think about it, which in itself is a flawed technique. If you ask someone how bad is it, and then you bang some esoteric sounding symbols and ask them how bad is it, it will probably go down by 30-40%. That's obviously a good thing if you're in the business of helping people feel better. But it's a flaw in how we're testing our work, but it's kind of the best we've got because we haven't got the aeroplane outside. So robust testing, ensuring that testing is even more robust, pushing it into darker corners of what they imagined before. Not just you're on a plane, how are you feeling? It's turbulent. There's an announcement about the turbulence. The staff are sitting down. How robustly are you going to kind of test your work? And secondly, test it in the field. If you haven't spoken to Jürgen Rasmussen or read his books, especially his first book, Provocative Hypnosis, it's not solely about this, but in one sense it is very much about testing your work in the real world, recognizing that you can have your good subject, your best subject in the chair, and yet those changes don't quite stick or take in the real world. Why is that? And examining those kind of questions. So there's the fact that it's easy. There's the fact that you haven't necessarily tested it robustly enough. And there's the fact that every other person out there is a hypnotherapist too. They just don't call themselves that. So they're going to have well-intentioned friends undermining them. They're going to have experts undermining them. And I'll give you an amusing example of that. So a lady saw my father to quit smoking. She did quit smoking. 3 months later, her asthma had also cleared up. She hadn't mentioned that. That's not what she was there for. But she didn't need her inhaler. She went to the doctor about something else entirely, and while there, the doctor suggested, "Oh, I'll give you some prescription for your Ventolin, whatever it's called." And she said, "No, I've quit smoking. My asthma's completely cleared up." And he kind of scratched his chin and said, "I know, I'll give you a prescription for some nicotine replacement patches for when the cravings come back." She was in my dad's office again within a week. Sometimes it's well-intentioned doctors, and sometimes it's well-intentioned friends. And sometimes it's a night out on the booze, but there are other people making suggestions. So sometimes you need to, work around that kind of thing. And just to say this, the other flaw in terms of rapid change and send them out there and I haven't heard from for a week is that we also assume that that's a lasting result. Most hypnotherapists, even very good ones, their record keeping or their follow-up procedure is very poor. I'd certainly count myself in that number for a long period of time. In terms of what my dad did, kind of if they're not calling, I offered a guarantee, actually. It was completely transparent. If they're not calling, then they must have got the change. It's a big assumption to be making, and something that's easily remedied by having a program of following up with your clients. Where I kind of started with this, it was like, well, isn't that some kind of negative suggestion that I'll be seeing how you are in 2 weeks' time? So I kind of shied away from that, if I'm honest.
It's interesting, and I totally agree about, I think for me, I want to know if it worked, great, because I can look back and reflect and say, well, okay, what was it about that, that I can begin to replicate what works, versus, if it's not successful, okay, great, how come?
Yeah.
What happened? Let's. So for me, it's not just about being open, being able to talk to people who ring up and with honesty about stats. It's also, I wouldn't want to rob myself of the learning mechanism that feedback gives.
Indeed. It's just one of these things that's easily lost when you're doing this day in, day out. I was very much a 5-day a week, 25, 30 sessions a week. When I started, I don't work like that anymore. But I'd like to think I'd be open to the learning, but it was very much, I'm just going to keep going at this, because it's a tough thing, even if you are open to learning, to kind of distinguish between one session and another in terms of where did it turn.
Absolutely.
I have reasonably strong feelings about memory recovery, regression type work based on the science, based on the evidence, based on the fact that it appears to be bad therapy. But I could point to hundreds of sessions I've done where it seemed, from my view, that very brief dip into a first event and the uncoupling of the emotions that went with it is exactly when it turned. That's how it looked from my perspective of trying to learn. I'm not saying that was the case, because I use a number of techniques in concert, but maybe I was just interpreting the fact that, well, that's when they showed some emotion, or that's when we saw a tear, or that's when we saw a sigh of, and I'm interpreting that as, well, that's the thing, that's where it happened. It's very difficult, but I certainly encourage people to keep records and to follow up without feeling that we're going to somehow torpedo our work by asking how is it going.
Sure. Going back a second, because we started talking about going back and looking and remembering past events. I think a lot of people do have a belief around therapy that if you've had a traumatic experience, therapy is going to consist of reliving the trauma repeatedly. And would you agree with that, or would you make a distinction between reliving and recoding the past?
I think, well, the idea that that's going to be what therapy is about is still, in my opinion, just a legacy of Freud's dominance for years. And even outside of psychoanalysis, the fact that it's true, the vast majority of styles of therapy do have you doing that. And many of the therapists who kind of think they're working in a different way still use memory recovery timeline type things as the backbone of their system. So there's some truth in the fact that, or at least that expectation that could be the case, that very often it will be lived up to. But whether the general population are thinking about reliving my trauma again and again, I don't know if they'll go that far. I think they're more interested in the sort of archaeological, I may uncover some information, a sort of dig around in there, or that they have something in mind, a painful moment that the last counsellor kind of dragged out of them, and that it's probably going to mean looking at that again. I think this puts a lot of people off therapy if they've done that kind of thing and it was unsuccessful, because it was reasonably likely that it would be painful. And as you know, therapy doesn't need to be painful. So there is that. There is some kind of misconception. In a sense, there is lots of it still going on. Is it necessary? We know it isn't necessary. We know that memory recovery isn't necessary. And we know that memory recovery is, if you're behaving like memories are true, real things, outside of the extreme end of a completely false memory, my view is that all memory to a greater or lesser degree is false. Your relationship to it is a massive modulating factor, not just how you perceive it. So when I do that kind of thing, and many of the brief therapy tools we have, if you like, aim to recode the memory. What do we mean by recode? Well, we could just mean we scratch it, turn it round, make it different, whatever it is that you want to do. It could mean that we look at it from an observing self's perspective and realise who was in the right and who was in the wrong, and have some, sense of a new perspective on it. It could be that we add content. If I'm doing something like that, then typically you go and say what needed to be said to that younger you. It only takes 10 seconds, tell them what they need to hear, give them the comfort and the confidence they need, give them a hug and say goodbye to them. This will never bother you again. Things like that, very, very brief statements that just clear it up. Like you're the parent speaking to your own kid, you know what needs to be said here. It doesn't matter. Everything's going to be okay. Is that reliving past traumas? Not necessarily. Because reliving kind of suggests you're going to have the feeling. Mm-hmm. And if you're stealthy with how you use these techniques, then there doesn't need to be any feeling, or at least very little. Or you can use the little there is to transform, that program, if you like. So yeah, there's something to it. I'm certainly not afraid to do it, but I tend to refer to anything involving looking back, finding a memory, more as emergency techniques. Mm-hmm. Another thing, which perhaps is a little sad to say, is that sometimes, because of client expectation about the nature of therapy, doing something brief where you look back and you uncover something almost seems to tick a box of, now something's happening. Now I'm doing therapy. Now I've remembered. I'd be loath to say it's the remembering that's therapeutic, but these techniques still keep demanding a place in the toolkit. I keep trying to work them out, but they still sit there around the edge, and every now and again I'll do it.
I quite agree. I quite agree, and I think some people do come with particular expectations, and it's like, unless you tick the box off, they can't give themselves permission to have the change.
Yeah, I don't know. I've just seen that happen almost by accident. Let's say I'm working with a phobia and my normal techniques don't seem to be being as effective as I might hope them to. I do a regression and bang, you can almost see the bits of information connecting and the kind of, aha, now I understand. But as we know, remembering doesn't guarantee that something's therapeutic. Understanding doesn't guarantee change. In some sense, it just seems to help some people get some kind of traction, get some distance. Just to at least stop playing it out with the same theme, music, and motifs they always have done. And as you know, that can be enough. I don't want to sound down on NLP. I'm not, because at the center of what I do in therapy are many of those early techniques. But one thing is that many of those techniques, what they have in common is they just ask you to do it differently. You hadn't thought about it until now. You hadn't even conceived that you could do it differently. The techniques, however elaborate and meaningful they appear, are just permission to do it differently enough that when that new differently becomes automatic, you have a different experience. And that moment is also key in therapy. The moment you spoke of when you're kind of testing, for me, is very much a moment I'm building toward. And in that moment, when you have the baffled sort of, I'm not feeling it. I'm thinking about flying, I'm not feeling it. It's a moment to strike with more direct post-hypnotic suggestion. That's exactly how it's going to be. From today, whenever you try to remember what that was like, the more distant it will become, and just kind of hammer in and shore up and cement the change. It's a very definite moment in the course of the interaction I have with people. I am testing, but I don't really care whether it's a 0 or a 2. I care whether you are surprised almost at just your inability to do this. You wouldn't be surprised if I said, look, I want you to have a fear of that clock. Where would you start if you wanted to have a fear of this clock? And people look like, what do you mean? It's ridiculous. Let's just try. I can't, It shows them that they have no idea how this thing was constructed and that they played no part in how it was constructed. Someone said to me the other day, well, I'd get the clock and beat you over the head with it. I said, you could beat me over the head with the clock all day. I would not have a fear of the clock. I might have a fear of you, but I'm not going to have a fear of the clock. You couldn't even drill a phobia of something like that into my head. Again, part of the sort of undercurrent of what I'm trying to do, which has shifted in recent years, is rather than trying to give the person a sense of control, which seemed like an obvious and worthy thing to do,
Yep.
a preference now is just to point out how involved you were in setting up this response and how uninvolved you are when it goes off, So it's let's just look at this for what it is. Because we've been pinning you have been pinning a lot of value on it and writing a lot of story around it. And that story may have amounted to, I'm an anxious person. But the truth is, something happened and there was a response. And this association became automatic to the point you forgot that you ever imagined it. You just know that this happens in certain situations. Now you remember it was just your imagination. You can stop imagining that any time, can't you? You can imagine something else entirely, right? Those few words I've given you there are kind of fallen out of the uncovering of our model of hypnosis, but essentially basing the idea is that your personal reality in any given moment is a fiction. It's an automatically imagined fiction, and it's generally pretty reliable. But it's a fiction nonetheless. It's paper thin. And your relationship to it in terms of a sense of control or a sense of it just happening to you, something you do or something that happens, is the important element of it. It's also the key thing that would make any interaction hypnotic or not, is this sense of involuntariness or automaticity. Mm-hmm. So what we found is just reminding people of that. It's obvious enough. That's why they're in therapy, is they're experiencing something as a happening. They can't stop it. They can't control it. Or, their problems could be the mirror opposite of that. But just reminding people that this is the case and giving them permission to stop doing that can be enough for things to change right there and then, which when you try and pick it apart, there's so little to it. But I find, again, that's why I mentioned that about NLP techniques just being permission to do it differently, because when you try to pick them apart, we can look at the submodalities and we can look at the perceptual positions and so on. But if you've done this for years, you'll all know that these things can be stripped away, that it can be easier than that there are times where it's literally a suggestion that you can change. In the same way, people have had conversations with a friend where something they've said, at some point, the person just kind of sat up and said, you know what? I know exactly what I'm going to do. And if we try to unpick it and bring it down to the technique or down to the process, which again is exactly how I got into this stuff, what's the important bit? Or even, is that submodality change better than that submodality change? I actually think this just leads you down an endless path of examination that doesn't necessarily point us back toward what is therapeutic about it. It's strange because we want to learn our techniques and hone our techniques and, deliver them in the best way. But sometimes I think it's easy to get caught in the detail where actually there are many other things being communicated in, let's say, take a fast phobia cure, even the original kind of effort. There are many things being communicated there outside of the fact that you're making this picture and sound different. There are suggestions for control. There are suggestions for completion. There are suggestions for creativity. There's all sorts of stuff that's kind of wrapped up in a technique like that that encourages collaboration, feedback, So, quite remember where I was going with this point or what the question even was, but.
But I think it's fascinating anyway. Just hearing your thoughts unravel about all of these things, and certainly what seems to be is that rather than getting very caught up, in the step-by-step stages or processes of a particular technique, it's actually stepping back and saying, well, look, what are the essence behind these techniques? What's all wrapped up in these things? That actually beginning to have an appreciation for the therapeutic role that's embedded deeper than the techniques.
Yeah. I use the same techniques over and over. I use many of the same words over and over. But I still feel like it's a personal connection when I'm looking at that person and delivering these words. Mm-hmm. It's a strange thing about where the emphasis is or where the connection is made. But there are lots of interesting studies suggesting that this is the thing, or at least the thing that you should not ignore. This therapeutic alliance, this agreement on goals and having them, not just having them and not just having smart goals, but some mutual understanding of where this is going and some of the stepping stones, the development of a bond that communicates. I'm with you on this, being settled in your own belief that change is not just possible, but change is possible for this person and change is possible for this person, and often very fast, regardless of what they say, regardless of what history served up, regardless what other experts have said, regardless, of almost anything, you can still hold firm to that belief. And that can be not just communicated, but accepted. It's not that I'm saying it takes a lot to mean those words, but when you're first starting out, you're perhaps carrying some hope and some faith in the technique. It's obvious, really. You've learnt the technique, you've been told it works, and you try it and it worked once or it didn't work or whatever. And some people are very fortunate. I was fortunate in that whatever it was I was doing in those first few sessions worked. After 3 sessions, I was convinced. Soon after that, I had one completely not work, not change. But I'd already seen that it can work. We can change. I barely even know what I'm doing. I've got a few pieces of paper, keep your eyes shut. Something's working. So it alerted me, if nothing else, to our potential for change. And the fact that what I'd read in those, again, early Bandler Grinder books, that it can be easy. It doesn't need to be painful. And I'm talking about frogs into princes and using your brain for a change. Mm-hmm. That was the overwhelming message. And that's why I still encourage people to read those books, because it may well be that you want to get into this, you want to be a therapist, but you're carrying some of the kind of older ideas about therapy and duration and relationship and all that kind of stuff. Those books just shook me up and were just like, oh, really? Well, I'll give it a try. My dad was coming in with case after case that, again, were just mind-blowing. If I even went through some of the early efforts he made that utterly convinced us that we were almost making people superhuman in terms of performance. They'd go from consistently 8th to 10th in a group of professional athletes to just miles ahead. Yep. On the squash court, playing a professional once a month, getting destroyed, perhaps getting a point, to destroying that person to the point they smashed their racket. One session. You'll remember everything you've learned playing squash in the last 25 years when that door closes. You will be able to execute everything you've learned. Simple, direct suggestion. And time after time after time after time, seeing people just transform. Now, is that transformation a long way off from where they're at now. It kind of seems that way. I'm not massively into the athletics, but I watched 100 meters the other day, and it led to me watching Usain Bolt, probably the last World Championships or maybe longer, where he ran 9.58 for 100 meters. So, even, we get under 10 seconds. Yes, in a championships, people often stretch themselves and they shave off 100th of a second. There's 500th of a second between place 1 and 2 the other day. That guy got the US record, or maybe that was in when he got the world record. But 9.58, that's like 60 years of improvements right there in a single race. Does that seem a world away from what someone else is going to do? Well, it does. Yeah, it seems a world away. And so does beating your personal best, and so does shaving another 10th of a second off of something. But then it happens, and I feel the same way often about people's problems. Like one of the kind of useful references that any therapist can check in with is the Human Gibbons list of basic human needs. So similar to kind of Maslow's stuff, but less about self-actualization and more about us as an organism needing a good dose of a number of things and needing a good dose of all of those things. Some of which are obvious, like food and water, some of which sound a bit fluffier, like a sense of control, a sense of purpose, sense of meaning, feeling that we're good at something, feeling stretched. So one thing you can do in therapy is check in with your client and just see where the holes are. And often they're glaring. If you say to people, what gives you a sense of purpose and meaning in your life? They look at you like, what do you mean? My kids are at university. The house is paid for. What do you... Nothing. My life is sweet. What stretches you? Day to day, week to week. Not just physically, but what's taxing? How are you growing? I don't know. I gave up all my hobbies. There often be glaring holes. So one approach is to kind of recognize that these things are quite easily remedied by let's find some things. Could be calling the elderly relative once a week. It could be visiting someone. It could be doing a day in a charity shop. It doesn't matter. It's what would improve that score on that sense of purpose. And that's kind of, one way of looking at it. The way I feel about it now is that all of these things actually are, again, closer than close between dissatisfaction or being unsatisfied and being satisfied. Think how quickly you may have transformed in your life when you just decided, you were going to set off on this project. No, I know what I'm going to do. This means what am I going to do? And I know what I'm going to do. Completely converts a sense of purpose. Something's bothering you, worrying you, and you decide, I'm going to call them. I'm going to find out what's been said. You're still prepared for what may have been, or unprepared for what might happen, what may be said. But your sense of control about it has gone from 0 to 100. Mm. So, again, I feel that often these miraculous shifts we get in therapy are less about the recoding, although that's what it looks like when you're running those kind of techniques, and more are just these subtle but almost complete inner shifts with regard to our basic needs. It's almost like nothing needs to change other than your attitude around it sometimes. Yes, eat decent food, drink some water, socialize, get feedback, give love to people. Your life will be richer and better. Mm. But how far away are we at any given moment from at least being on the path where we want to be? Well, no distance really. And a lot of this comes down to a decision. Even if you don't quite know how you're going to do it. I'm going to climb to base camp 1. What do you know about mountain climbing? Nothing. My friend's going. I'm going to do it. You know you're going to do it. It's that kind of thing. Sometimes it's really just a decision that allows people to change. A decision they didn't necessarily know they could make, because their experiencing of the problem has always been that it's something that happens to them. It's something they're not in control of.
So, can you give me maybe a couple of real examples, client sessions where they come in one way, they leave another, and it seems miraculous. It seems quite amazing that you could share with us.
Yeah, I could share many. A guy came to see me, and I remember him because he announced himself as a skeptic. He said, I don't believe in this at all, but my friend quit smoking with you. I've got this weird problem. No one can help me. You're my last resort, that kind of thing. None of which is music to my ears, but it turned out he responded very well. He had a problem where He'd lost a few teeth, and he was having a plate made to have, I guess, 4 or 6 false teeth fitted at the front. When they went to put the putty or the mould in his mouth, he retched as if to be sick. And they struggled and struggled. Eventually they got it in, they made his teeth, and he'd had them in his pocket for a year. He'd never even once managed to put them in his mouth. So I asked him where it started, and he said, well, in the dentist that day, we did a bunch of work. I did parts work. I did some kind of rewind type technique, and more through curiosity than anything else, I decided to timeline. And within 1 or 2 seconds of go back to the first event related to that feeling, he was, bear in mind, this guy was about 68 when he came in. He was 13 years old, in the doctor at a certain angle, sticking a spatula. And he said, he's sticking a spatula down my throat. I feel sick. Now, it was, again, not that I'm encouraging the memory recovery bit, but it was crystal clear, and it completely forgotten this moment or never remembered that moment until this point, never related it to his problem. But with the simplest of permission of go back and find it, he was there in a second. And again, I know what the science says about memory recovery under hypnosis. It doesn't improve our memory. It looks that way because you're creating conditions for it. So he took, at the end of the session, he got out his teeth, he stuck them in his mouth. He said, it's strange. Yeah, they don't really feel that comfortable. They don't fit. They've been in your pocket for a year. Get out of here. So things like that, because some of the theories, obviously, we have about phobias, or certainly the kind of phobia that's learned through one trauma, one event. Mm-hmm. This seemed to be evidence for that, if you like. It was like, wow, look at this first event, and I appreciate I'm interpreting that as being meaningful when it may not be. But if you've been doing this for a decent period of time and you're comfortable facing anxieties and fears or helping people do that, you'll know that you just don't need to live with those things. And it doesn't warrant our analysis. It didn't even really warrant my curiosity. You just don't need to live with those things. They can change. They're just a legacy. They're just a survival mechanism if we're going to go for those very, very specific kind of fears. So, and they can be changed. They can be reworked, recoded, recolored, retextured very easily. Another thing that still amazes me, and most of the stories I'll tell you now are things I've seen my father do, just because he does a lot more of this impromptu than I do, is pain control. Mm-hmm. I'll recount one example again. People who know me well will have heard this, but I've seen this many, many times. My dad, Freddie Jacquin, was doing a group smoking session. It was, in a hotel somewhere. The chairs weren't that comfortable, weren't that special. And afterwards, a couple of people said, I'm not sure if I got into that. I'm actually in terrible pain. I struggle with these kind of chairs and couldn't really concentrate because of that. Do you do anything for pain? And my dad, being my dad, just said, stick around at the end and we'll spend a few minutes together. Another lady heard that, said, can I stick around? I also suffer with this. And it was a kind of crumbling hip. She was on crutches. She had been for 11 years. Mm. My dad did a very brief induction that resulted in their arms being in the air. He gave them some sort of imagery to represent their pain and to go through, and their arm drifted down only as quickly as they were free of it. Both these people burst into tears, both completely free of pain. Does that mean they will be forever? I don't know. But there was no audience. There was no frenzy being whipped up by an evangelist, pastor here. It was the effect was immediate. This lady said, "Do you think I can walk without my crutches?" She got up. He said, "I don't know. I'm not a doctor." She got up. She could. She walked out with them under her arm, holding her kid's hand, stuff like that. I've seen him do that on so many occasions where I've allowed my doubts to just think, well, no, this guy's on the highest level of morphine. His kind of ankle is fused to his foot from that car accident. It's just, no. And 5 minutes later, I've seen that person without any pain. And nothing, in terms of the technique, nothing that I couldn't share and you'd remember in like 5 or 10 minutes. You'd think, where is the technique? It's component pieces there that we can analyze, the dissociation and it doesn't matter. It's miraculous. I keep referring to this therapeutic alliance and terms that all therapists are aware of and actually talk about rapport is one of them, empathy is another, genuineness is another. And I've always had a funny relationship in fact, I've always had a funny relationship with rapport. I don't really think it's there. It's something we need to build. I think if you're genuine, if your intentions are good, if you're listening and speaking, with some purpose and meaning, it's more that it's there to be lost rather than something that we have to build. Empathy is another one. Are we actually trying to experience our client's world? Now, if I'm honest, if I ask myself, am I really doing that in therapy? I think the answer is no. I want to understand, in a sense. I haven't necessarily had that fear or that phobia, but I think I can understand what fear would feel like in the context of. It's transferable in my imagination from, that performance to, I don't know, speaking in front of people. I think I can get it, but do I really want to experience their world? Well, I don't think I do. I certainly don't want to get lost in it. So empathy, in a kind of practical sense, then becomes about trying to communicate an understanding. And this could be done very easily with words. I think I understand what you're feeling. It makes you feel angry when you're spoken to that way. And looking for what comes next, rather than, I think you get angry at authority figures, which is analysis, which is examination. It's a very subtle difference in trying not to feel necessarily what they're feeling, but to show an understanding of those feelings. And the reason this has kind of become more than just a fluffy word for me is down to the fact that from the client's perspective, when the client comprehends that the therapist is trying to see the world the way they see it, they feel encouraged to clarify and increase their understanding. Yeah, as the therapist is gently grasping, being empathic, not knowing, not, I know exactly what you need or my experience tells me, but gently kind of grasping that experience, you're actually teaching the client to be empathic with themselves, to grasp their experience in the same way the therapist is grasping it. And again, this kind of positive regard, for me, was very much coloured by some of the NLP presuppositions. Somewhere in there, you have all the resources you need. You're doing the best with the resources you think you have. And those kind of things that help kind of shape my attitude as a therapist early on. But if I examine them, if I write them down, do I really want to stand next to that? You have all the resources you need. Well, actually, more often than not, I find that's the case. But no, occasionally people just say, no, I've never felt confident. I've never done that, never experienced that. The message I'm trying to give, and I know I've said this already, but I'll keep coming back to it, is I'm with you. That's what I mean by genuineness and transparency. Not false hope, not little mantras of this is how it's going to be. Or I'm with you on this. We're going to do this. The same attitude you'd take, if you had a kid and you knew everything was going to be okay.
So, if there are people out there curious to get involved with therapeutic intervention work or learn about different models of therapy, what would you recommend in terms of practicing, refining skills, books to read, people to learn from?
I get asked this question quite a lot, so I should just be able to reel off an answer. But I guess it comes down to this. First off, not just the hypnotherapy industry, but even more so the kind of NLP industry was beautifully described by one of our country's best performers as bloated. It's become a training industry, selling training courses, proliferating ever more advanced techniques, which makes it difficult to navigate if you're a beginner. And especially if you're already a professional, thinking, do I really want to dabble with that stuff? Will it damage my credibility? Well, there's so much good stuff that's easily integrated or used standalone, or can be appropriate by a coach or a teacher or a nurse or as well as a therapist, that I just think it demands to be looked at. When you're looking at it, if you can get into some of the terms that are being used, what I say to people about training is find someone who is a working therapist, ideally, or has vast experience using the stuff that they are teaching. It sounds obvious, I know, but some of the courses out there are so busy trying to be comprehensive, teach you everything there is to know about the different schools of thought about hypnotherapy, or everything there is to know about NLP and language and so on, that even if you complete the training, I often say to people, do you feel like you have a system? You know, when a client walks in, do you feel like you have, bang, you just get into mode that you have a systematic approach? And very often that's what people are lacking. So I try to encourage people to find a trainer or training where they're teaching stuff that they actually do in the real world, and that they have a vast experience of doing that, because again, it's just the nature of the industry, and the vast majority of people perhaps not needing to earn a full-time living from this, or not managing to make a full-time living from it, become trainers. And it's a self-regulated industry, so it's very easy to do that. And being able to do this stuff to some degree makes you feel like you're an expert, because compared to, you know, people who don't know about this stuff, that's how it kind of feels. It feels like you've got the invisible cloak I mentioned earlier, and therefore you know more than most people, so you must be an expert. So that's led to a very bloated industry. So you need to choose your trainer wisely, and the way to do it wisely is to ensure that they've got a practical track record with real world clients, and that they're actually capable of teaching. But some of the books that I thoroughly recommend people read, one is, I've mentioned these guys already, but Human Givens, A New Approach to Emotional Health. It's a fantastic book. I've given away several copies, because even if you've been doing this stuff for years, by chapter 3, you'll have your mind blown. If you're considering hypnosis, then again, it really depends on your mindset. If you want to find evidence for it, I mean, the fact that it's approved to a degree by the British Medical Association, American Medical Association, but look at the Oxford Handbook of Hypnosis. Actually look at the research. Look at what there is an evidence base for that's satisfactory. It's not as much as hypnotherapists would like, but it's still very impressive with regard to certain conditions, and there is a lot of good research. So look at the Handbook of Clinical Hypnosis or the Oxford Handbook of Hypnosis, and it will give you a nice overview of the evidence with experts from completely, with you know, there's no consensus on what hypnosis is or why it works. You'll have those experts interpreting that research, so it gives you a broad view of things. There's a great book by Lynn and Kirsch, Evidence-Based Hypnotherapy. It's a good starting point. Kind of assumes no knowledge, eschews some of the more mythical ideas about hypnosis, and gets into, well, what's left? You know, what do we have evidence for, and how can we present that?
Anthony, if people are listening to the podcast and are keen to hear more from you, where should they go? How should they get in touch?
Okay, well, my personal website is anthonyjacquin.com, and I've got a number of interviews that are available for free online if people want to kind of hear my thoughts on other things. And one thing you could also check out that's free, that kind of illustrates, I call it the basic recipe, if you like, what I do most of the time in impromptu hypnosis settings, by going to a channel on YouTube. It's called How To, it's a number 2, very cool, isn't it? How to Hypnotize with an S, How to Hypnotize. And there are about 7 or 8 lessons on there. Over 500,000 people have watched the inductions video, but what, only 17,000 have watched the wake up video. So my advice is watch all of them, and you'll get an understanding of kind of, you know, what I'm about and what I do. There's so much stuff available. This interview series will obviously be of value. It's important that people listen to practitioners that perhaps sit outside of what they do. I know that I became a better therapist once I started paying attention to stage hypnotists. And I became a better stage hypnotist once I started figuring out how to do this anytime, anywhere. It kind of, each aspect of it informs the other, and try not to be put off by the fact that people do perform and do silly things with it. It's not the totality of what this is about. Try not to be put off by sort of hardened NLP practitioners who only ever speak in a funny way and no longer connect. And practice. It's just a practical art. It's so simple to get started. Read what you can, but get started as quickly as you can. Find practical resources. and listen to some of the vast resources online these days.
Absolutely great advice, and all of the book references that you've mentioned over the course of the interview, and all of the links that you've given, we'll put upload with the episode details as well, so that people who are listening now, if you go to the Rapid Change website or you go onto iTunes, they'll all be there, so it'll be easy to get in touch with Anthony.
Great. I hope you made a note of those books.
I absolutely did. Absolutely did. And I've already ordered 2 of them.
Excellent. Brilliant.
Anthony, thank you so much for your time today, and I hope all the listeners out there have found it as enjoyable and as interesting as I have.
Thanks for the opportunity to chat, Howard. It was good fun.
I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, why not share it with anyone you think might be interested, and even head over to iTunes to give us a glowing review. You'll find more about what's coming up on our Facebook page, facebook.com/rapidchangeworks. And of course, you'll find all the links related to this episode, plus those free 5 steps to getting your suggestions to sizzle over at rapidchange.works.